My graduation gift was a toaster. Not a new toaster, still in its box with that new appliance smell, but a used one. It was chrome, but smudged with fingerprints I knew weren't mine. And when I looked into the slots, I could see the ghosts of someone else's breakfast clinging to the wires. "We're so proud of you, kiddo," my dad Richard said, giving my shoulder a quick, firm pat that was meant to convey a world of fatherly affection, but landed with the emotional weight of a fly hitting a windshield. My mum, Teresa, was already busy directing the photo op. "Stand next to the azaleas, Caroline. The light is better there. Hold up your diploma. Smile, for heaven's sake. You just graduated summa cum laude." She said the words, but they were hollow. Just a caption for the picture she'd post on Facebook later. "My name is Caroline Kelly. I was 22 years old, and I'd just finished a double major in finance and cybersecurity with a perfect GPA. I was the first person in my family to even finish a 4-year degree, let alone with honours. And for my trouble, I got a greasy toaster and a command to smile. I smiled. It was easier than explaining why I wasn't. A week later, our house was unrecognisable. Balloons in my brother's favourite colour, blue, crowded the ceiling. A banner screamed, "Bon voyage, Mason!" over the doorway. The kitchen counter, which had held a single sad-looking sheet cake for my graduation, was now groaning under the weight of catered platters and a 3-tiered cake. The air smelled of expensive craft beer and my mum's cloying perfume. My brother Mason was holding court in the centre of the living room. At 20, he was 2 years younger than me, and had successfully managed to get himself suspended from his junior year at a state school, for reasons that kept changing, but seemed to involve a stolen campus golf cart and a lot of empty bottles. He was, in my parents' eyes, a charming rogue who just needed to find his path. I was leaning against the kitchen wall, nursing a cup of lukewarm punch, when my dad clinked a fork against his glass. The chatter died down. "A toast," Richard announced, beaming. He put a heavy arm around Mason's shoulders. "As you all know, our boy has had a bit of a challenging year, but we know he's got a bright future. Sometimes you just need a little push to find yourself, so your mother and I have decided to give him that push." My mum clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with theatrical tears. "We're giving you this, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling with pride. $18,000 to travel Europe and have the adventure of a lifetime." The room erupted in cheers. Mason looked stunned, then broke into the wide, easy grin that always made people forgive him for everything. He hugged my parents and I watched, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. $18,000? I'd worked 2 part-time jobs through my entire degree to avoid student loans, meticulously budgeting every penny. One of those jobs was as a teller, soon to be a junior compliance associate, at the local branch of a national bank. Later, as I was clearing empty plates, I overheard my mum talking to her sister. "It was just sitting there, you know," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. "That old insurance payout from Dad's policy, it just felt right, a sign." My blood went cold. The only significant insurance payout my parents ever received was the one they got when my grandfather died. The one they'd sworn up and down was going into a college fund for both Mason and me. The one I was told had been mostly depleted by my tuition, which I now knew was a lie. The next morning, I went to work at the bank. The branch was quiet, the air crisp with the hum of computers and central air. I sat at my terminal, the familiar green and white interface of the banking software glowing in front of me. My hands were shaking slightly. It was just a feeling, a sick suspicion, but I had to know. I had access. Not deep access, not yet, but enough. I typed in the account number for the Kelly Family College Fund, the one I knew by heart. My name was on it, alongside my parents'. My breath hitched as the summary page loaded. The balance was shockingly low. And there, at the top of the transaction history, was a line item from 3 days ago. Withdrawal, counter, processed by R. Kelly. Amount, $18,000. Underneath it, in the notes section was a single chilling phrase: per consent of co-beneficiary C. Kelly. I stared at the screen, the hum of the servers fading into a dull roar in my ears. I hadn't consented to anything. I hadn't even been asked. The hurt I'd felt my whole life, the quiet, simmering resentment of being the responsible, invisible child, snapped. It wasn't a hot, messy rage. It was cold. It was sharp. It was the beginning of a plan. For the rest of the day, I moved in a fog of icy calm. I finished my shift, smiled at customers, and balanced my drawer to the penny. But behind my eyes, the image of that transaction history was burned into my mind. The rage didn't feel hot. It was a block of dry ice in my chest, solid and freezing. That evening, I waited until my parents were asleep. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I went to the old desktop computer in the den, the one my dad used for bills and emails. His password was, predictably, password 123. I felt a flicker of disgust at his carelessness. My plan was simple. I started by documenting. Using my phone, I took crystal-clear pictures of the transaction on the bank's website. Then, I dug deeper. As a co-beneficiary, I had the right to view all account documents. I clicked through to the scanned withdrawal slip. And there it was, my signature. Except it wasn't. It was a crude, shaky imitation, the C too loopy and the Y at the end of Kelly trailing off at the wrong angle. It looked like a child's attempt at cursive. They hadn't even tried to make it convincing. They just assumed I'd never look. The next day at work, I pulled my friend Kendra aside during our lunch break. Kendra and I had started as tellers together 3 years ago. She was sharp and fiercely loyal, the kind of friend who would help you bury a body, no questions asked, but would also lecture you about your choice of shovel. We sat in her car in the employee parking lot. I handed her my phone without a word. She scrolled through the pictures, her expression hardening. "No," she whispered, looking from the screen to me. "Caroline, they didn't." "They did," I said, my voice flat. 18 grand. For Mason to go find himself in Ibiza. Kendra handed the phone back, her knuckles white. This is a felony. You know that, right? Bank fraud, forgery. I know what it is." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice low. "You can't just let this go. But if you report it, your own father—" "He made his choice," I said. "I just need to make sure I have everything. Irrefutable proof. Something they can't wriggle out of with tears or excuses." "Go slow," she urged, her eyes serious. "Don't do anything rash. Get every piece of paper, every digital crumb you can find. You work here. You know the process. Build a case so solid that no one can question it. Not the bank, not the cops, not even your mum." That night, the house felt like a pressure cooker. Mason was floating on a cloud of entitlement, showing off his new luggage and a ridiculously expensive-looking travel jacket. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was making a sandwich. "Can you believe it? Europe," he said, grinning. "I'm thinking I'll start in Spain, maybe do that running of the bulls thing." "Try not to get gored," I said, without looking up from the mustard. He laughed, completely missing the venom in my tone. "It's crazy, right? I didn't even have to ask. Mom and Dad just said I deserved it." "They said it was time I got a leg up." He paused, looking at me with a flicker of what might have been pity. "They know you're smart and all, you'll be fine. But guys like me, we need a little help sometimes." I just stared at him. He thought this was a rescue mission for the charming screw-up. He had no idea he was celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship. The final piece fell into place later that night. I was back on the family computer, sifting through my dad's sent emails. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just a feeling. And then I saw it. An email sent to the bank's general document submission address, dated the day of the withdrawal. The subject line was, "Consent form, Kelly College Fund." My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked it open. The body of the email was short and written to sound like me. "To whom it may concern, please see attached consent for the disbursement requested by my father, Richard Kelly." Thanks, Caroline Kelly. The attachment was a PDF. It was a scanned copy of the withdrawal form with the forged signature. But that wasn't the worst part. I recognized the scan. The signature, the exact same shaky, loopy signature, had been copied and pasted onto the form. Where had he gotten it? I scrolled through more of his files and found the source. A scanned copy of a tax return I'd signed when I was 18, a joint filing for a small investment my grandfather had left me. He had digitally lifted my teenage signature from a 7-year-old document and used it to steal my money. It wasn't just a forgery. It was premeditated. It was calculated. It sealed my resolve like concrete. The next day, I met Kendra at a small coffee shop, far from our usual lunch spots. The air smelled of burnt espresso and sugar. I slid a slim manila folder across the table. It contained printouts of everything: the transaction history, the withdrawal slip with the forged signature, and the email my father sent impersonating me, complete with the metadata showing it came from our home IP address. Kendra opened the folder and reviewed the contents, her expression grim. "This is airtight, Caroline. This is a slam dunk." "I know," I said, stirring my black coffee. "So what's the smartest way to play this?" "I report it, but I don't want it to become a branch-level circus. I want it handled quietly, internally, at least at first." "You'll have to file the report through the official fraud portal," she explained, tapping a finger on the printout of the email. "But in the description, you can request it be escalated directly to corporate compliance, citing a conflict of interest since you're an employee and it involves your family." That should keep it out of the hands of the local branch manager, at least for a few days. It gives you a bit of a buffer. I nodded, processing. "Okay, that's good." "Are you sure about this?" Kendra asked, her voice soft. "Once you hit submit, there's no going back. This will detonate your family." A wave of something heavy and cold washed over me. It wasn't guilt for what I was about to do. It was the crushing weight of all the years leading up to this moment. I remembered being 8 years old, proudly showing my parents a perfect score on a spelling test. My dad had glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to the TV to watch Mason's T-ball game. I remembered my 16th birthday, when my parents forgot to order a cake because they were busy driving 2 hours to pick Mason up from a weekend soccer camp. I remembered every holiday, every dinner, every small moment when my achievements were footnotes and his failures were dramatic sagas requiring everyone's full attention and resources. This wasn't about the $18,000. It was about the toaster. It was about the spelling test. It was about a lifetime of being treated like a reliable, self-maintaining appliance, while my brother was treated like a priceless, fragile heirloom. "They detonated it," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just documenting the explosion." That evening, the house was buzzing with Mason's pre-trip energy. He was packing, strewing clothes across his bedroom floor, and blasting music. My mum was flitting around him, folding his shirts and offering unsolicited packing advice. I stayed in my room, the door closed, and logged into the bank's fraud portal on my laptop. I filled out the form with methodical precision, uploading each piece of evidence. In the final text box, I followed Kendra's advice, formally requesting the case be handled by the Corporate Compliance Division due to the sensitive family conflict. I hovered my mouse over the submit button for a long moment, took a deep breath, and clicked. The screen refreshed with a confirmation number. It was done. A few hours later, I was scrolling through my phone when a new Instagram story popped up. It was from Mason. The picture was a close-up of a first-class airline ticket to Madrid, his hand holding it up against the backdrop of his new travel jacket. The caption was simple, a smug little digital victory lap. Funded and free. Something inside me snapped shut, a final lock clicking into place. The last vestiges of doubt evaporated. I walked to the den and took out a piece of my graduation stationery, the nice, thick cardstock with my university's seal embossed at the top. I found a matching envelope. Inside the card, I wrote nothing. I simply folded the printout of my father's email, the one where he impersonated me, with the scanned signature from the old tax return, and slipped it inside. I sealed the envelope and wrote on the front in my neatest cursive, "To Mom and Dad, love, your favourite." I propped it up on the centre of the kitchen island, right where they'd leave their keys and mail. It was a quiet, unassuming little bomb, waiting for morning. Then I went to my room, packed a small overnight bag with a change of clothes and my work uniform, and left. I wasn't going to be there for the blast. I spent the night at Kendra's apartment, sleeping on her lumpy but blessedly quiet couch. I woke up the next morning before she did, my phone clutched in my hand. The first call came at 7:03 a.m. It was my dad. I ignored it. A second later, a voicemail notification popped up. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. "Caroline, call me." "Now." His voice was tight, strained. He was trying to sound authoritative, but a tremor of panic bled through. "We need to talk about this misunderstanding." I deleted it. The second call came at 7:15 a.m. My dad again. I let it go to voicemail. This time, his voice was louder, fraying at the edges. "Caroline, pick up the phone. Your mother found some papers. What is this? What did you do? This is a joke, right?" "It's not funny." In the background, I could hear a faint, high-pitched wail. My mother. The sound was satisfyingly chaotic. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from Mason. "WTF is going on? Mum is freaking out and my ticket isn't checking in." I typed back a single sentence. "Ask Dad about the withdrawal slip." His reply was a string of confused question marks. The bank's fraud alert system is ruthlessly efficient. When a formal complaint is filed by a co-owner of an account alleging forgery, an automatic hold is placed on all associated family accounts pending investigation. Mason wasn't going to Madrid. He wasn't even going to the airport food court. His financial world, funded entirely by my parents, had just been frozen solid. An hour later, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Caroline?" "It's Emerson Crawford." His voice was sharp, professional and utterly bewildered. I knew the name. Emerson was our family's lawyer, a man my parents had on retainer for everything from property deeds to my father's occasional small business disputes. "I just received a frantic call from your father. He was difficult to understand, but he mentioned a bank complaint and a college fund. Can you tell me what's happening?" "He seems to be under the impression you've accused him of something serious. He forged my signature to withdraw $18,000 from a joint account," I said, my voice as calm and even as a dial tone. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "He what?" Emerson finally asked, the professional veneer cracking. "That's not possible. I reviewed the trust disbursement documents myself last year. Your signature is required for any withdrawal over $500. He assured me he had your consent for all transactions." "He lied," I said simply. "He lifted my signature from an old tax form and sent the bank a fraudulent consent email from our home computer." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind, the potential charges and liabilities stacking up like poker chips. "I see," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Thank you for clarifying, Caroline. I have another call I need to make." He hung up. I arrived at the bank for my shift, feeling strangely serene. The world was burning down behind me, but here, everything was orderly and calm. I was halfway through my morning tasks when my desk phone rang. It was the internal line from my branch manager's office. "Caroline, can you come to my office, please? Layla McCoy is here to see you." My blood ran cold. Layla McCoy was the head of the Regional Fraud Compliance Division. She was a legend in the company, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had personally overseen the termination of more than one employee for minor infractions. My request to escalate the case had worked, but I never expected her to show up in person. I assumed I was about to be fired for using my position to investigate my own family. I walked into the office, my back straight, ready for the axe to fall. Layla was sitting opposite my manager's desk, a slim file folder in her lap. She was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She gestured to the empty chair. "Caroline," she said, her voice crisp. "Thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the fraud report you filed last night." I braced myself. "Yes, ma'am." "Your documentation is impeccable," she continued, opening the folder. "Clear, concise, and thorough. You provided digital timestamps, IP address information, and a clear source for the forged signature. It's one of the most well-supported internal filings I've seen from someone outside my department." I stared at her, confused. This wasn't the preamble to a firing. She looked up from the file, her gaze direct. "There's an opening for a junior auditor in my division. It's a significant step up from your current role. It involves analysing cases just like this one, identifying procedural weaknesses, and working with law enforcement. The job is yours if you want it. You'd start next week." I accepted Layla's offer on the spot. It felt less like a choice and more like stepping through a door that had suddenly materialised in a solid wall. I walked out of the manager's office in a daze, clutching the promise of a new job like a life raft. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I knew I couldn't go back to Kendra's. I couldn't hide forever. I had to go home and face them. When I pulled into the driveway, my father's car was parked haphazardly, halfway on the lawn. I walked in the front door to a scene of utter devastation. My mother was sitting on the sofa, her face puffy and red from crying, a shredded tissue in her hand. My father was pacing the length of the living room, his face a mask of fury. Mason was slumped in an armchair, staring at his phone with a sullen, defeated expression. The graduation card I'd left lay on the coffee table, torn in half. My father stopped pacing the second he saw me. "There you are," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," I said, my voice quiet. I set my purse down on the entryway table, my movements deliberate. "I filed a report about a fraudulent transaction." "A fraudulent transaction?" my mother shrieked, jumping to her feet. "It was for your brother. It was family. We were going to pay you back." "When?" I asked, turning to face her. "After he backpacked through Europe on my dime. There was never any intention of paying it back, and you know it." "You've ruined us," Richard yelled, taking a step toward me. "The bank has frozen everything. Emerson Crawford called. He's dropping us as clients. He said he can't represent a man who forges his own daughter's signature." "Then maybe you shouldn't have forged my signature," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Mason finally looked up from his phone. "This is insane, Caroline." "It's just money. Why are you being so paranoid and selfish? You're destroying our family over this." "Our family?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "This family was destroyed a long time ago. This is just the first time any of you have had to face the consequences. I have a legal and professional obligation as a bank employee to report fraud. You made me a witness to a felony. What did you expect me to do?" My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Trinity Price. Your mom has been calling everyone we know from school, telling them you're having some kind of breakdown. Just wanted to give you a heads up. If you need anything, let me know. Trinity Price. We've been in the same finance program, rivals for the top grades in every class. We weren't friends, more like respected adversaries." Her text was an unexpected and strangely comforting gesture. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed again, this time with a formal email alert from my personal savings account. Security alert. An unsuccessful login attempt was made from a recognized IP address. If this was not you, please secure your account immediately. The IP address was my home's. My father, in his desperation, had just tried to get into my personal savings. The account I had painstakingly built since I was 16, the one thing that was entirely mine. A cold fury, purer and harder than anything I had felt before, settled in my bones. I looked up from my phone, my eyes locking with his. You just tried to log into my savings account. He flinched, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before the anger returned. I needed to see if you had moved the money. It's over, I said, my voice final. I turned and walked toward the stairs. I'm getting my things. I'll be out in an hour. You can't just leave, my mother cried. After everything we've done for you. I stopped on the bottom step and looked back at them. My furious father, my weeping mother, my useless, coddled brother. You did nothing for me, I said. You did it for yourselves. You raised me to be responsible and independent so you wouldn't have to bother with me. And you're angry because it worked. As I was packing the last of my things, my phone rang. It was Trinity. I answered, surprised. Hey, she said, her voice hesitant. Sorry to bother you, but after your mum's weird call, I had a feeling. Is everything okay? Not really, I said, zipping up my suitcase. But it will be. Listen, she said. The reason I called is my parents did something similar to my older brother a few years ago. Not forgery, but they drained his college fund to bail my dad's business out and told him he'd spent it all. Gaslit him for years. He found out by accident. It messes you up. I sank down onto my bed, the suitcase beside me. For the first time, I felt a crack in my icy composure. Yeah, I whispered. It does. You did the right thing, she said firmly. Don't let them make you think you didn't. I started my new job in the fraud compliance division the following Monday. My new desk was in a quiet corner of the corporate office, a world away from the noise and forced cheerfulness of the branch. Layla McCoy became my direct supervisor, and she was all business. She walked me through the official response process for my own case as if I were just another auditor. The evidence is irrefutable, she said, pointing to a monitor displaying the case file. The withdrawal was processed in person by Richard Kelly. The digital consent form was sent from an IP address registered to his home. The signature on the form is a verifiable digital copy of a signature on file from a document you signed as a minor. From a legal standpoint, it's a clean case. There's no ambiguity. She was coaching me, I realized, showing me how to detach, to see the facts without the family drama attached. It was the most valuable lesson she could have taught me. Meanwhile, the fallout in my personal life was spreading. Our town wasn't huge, and my father was a well-known small business owner. The story began to leak, first as whispers, then as more concrete rumours. Did you hear about Richard Kelly? Something about the bank. It was only a matter of time before it became public knowledge. My mother, Teresa, tried to get ahead of it. She took to social media, her natural habitat. She posted a long, rambling Facebook status, dripping with passive aggression and carefully worded lies. She wrote about a difficult family matter and a misunderstanding that had been cruelly blown out of proportion by a troubled, ungrateful daughter. She painted me as vindictive and mentally unstable, lashing out for attention. It might have worked if she hadn't taught me to be so meticulous. Kendra, ever my loyal ally, had been monitoring my mother's page. She started posting screenshots in the comments, a picture of Mason's funded and free Instagram story. A screenshot of the text where he admitted our parents just gave him the money. Anonymous friends of friends started sharing the post, and soon the narrative my mother had tried to spin was unraveling in real time with digital receipts. People started connecting the dots between her vague post and the rumours about my dad and the bank. Her attempt at damage control had turned into a public bonfire of her reputation. I was at my desk a few days later, analysing transaction patterns for an unrelated case, when I saw him. Mason was standing by the security desk in the lobby, looking wildly out of place in his expensive travel jacket, which was now wrinkled and stained. He looked sweaty and nervous, his usual charm curdled into desperation. The security guard called my extension. "There's a Mason Kelly here to see you. He says it's a family emergency." I took a deep breath. "Send him up." He was escorted to a small, glass-walled conference room near my desk. I walked in and sat down opposite him, folding my hands on the cool, polished table. He looked terrible. The carefree glow he'd had just a week ago was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes. "They're going to charge him, Caroline," he said, his voice cracking. "Dad met with a new lawyer. He said the bank is pursuing criminal charges. Forgery, wire fraud. They're serious." "I know," I said. "It is serious. You have to stop this," he pleaded, leaning forward. "Go to them. Tell them it was a mistake. A misunderstanding, like Mom said. Tell them you were confused." "I wasn't confused, Mason. I was robbed." He slumped back in his chair, running a hand through his messy hair. "Okay, look," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The money. It's still in my account. The account is frozen, but the money is there. What if I give you half? $9,000. We tell them we agreed to split it, and you just forgot you'd agreed. It's a simple mistake. You get your money, and Dad is in the clear." I stared at him. After everything, he still thought this was about the money. He still thought he could charm and bargain his way out of a felony. He thought I was as transactional and morally bankrupt as they were. "No," I said, my voice flat. "Why not?" he demanded, his voice rising. "It's a good deal." "You get $9,000 for doing nothing." "Because it was never about the money," I said, standing up. "And you still don't get that." I turned to leave, but he shot up from his chair. "What is it about then? Why are you doing this to us?" I paused at the door and looked back at him, at his desperate, uncomprehending face. "You should go, Mason. You're not supposed to be here." He left, escorted by security, leaving me alone in the sterile quiet of the conference room. My revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, methodical clicking of keyboard keys, the neat filing of a report, the cold, hard logic of consequences. And it was just getting started. I didn't go back to my desk right away. Instead, I went to Layla's office. The door was open. She looked up as I stood in the doorway. "He was just here," I said. "My brother." Layla nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I was notified by security." "Are you all right?" He offered me half the money to drop the complaint. A flicker of something, disgust maybe, crossed her face. "Let me guess. He thinks this is just a negotiation." "He doesn't understand," I said, the words feeling heavy and final. "None of them do." I had one last thing in my arsenal, a final piece of evidence I hadn't submitted, something I'd held back for myself. A few months ago, before all of this, I had set up a small, voice-activated recorder in the living room. It was a paranoid little security measure I'd bought after my dad mentioned he'd borrowed $20 from my wallet. I'd mostly forgotten about it, but after I discovered the withdrawal, I'd retrieved it. Sifting through hours of mundane chatter, I found it. A conversation between my parents from the night they decided to give Mason the money. I pulled out my phone and found the audio file. I didn't want to see Mason again, so I sent it to him in a text message with no comment. I knew he'd listen. The recording was damningly clear. My mother's voice wheedling and manipulative. "Richard, it's the right thing to do. Mason needs this. He's sensitive. He needs a win." Then my father's, full of weak justifications. "But it's Caroline's money too, Teresa. Half of it is hers." And finally, the line that had gutted me when I first heard it. My mother, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please. Caroline doesn't use money right. She just saves it. She's like a squirrel, hoarding it away. It's not for living. Not like Mason. He'll use it to build character, to have experiences. She wouldn't know what to do with it. She just saves it." The words echoed in my head. All my discipline, my hard work, my sacrifices. They saw it as a character flaw, a failure to live correctly. My responsible nature wasn't something to be proud of. It was an inconvenience, a justification for their theft. This was never about money. It was about erasure. They didn't just want to give Mason a gift. They wanted to take from me, to reallocate my future to fund his present, because they valued his experience of life more than mine. The fraud case moved swiftly after that. With a mountain of evidence and my father's clumsy attempts to cover his tracks, there was no defense. Richard was formally charged with felony bank fraud and forgery. The news hit the local paper, a small article on page 3 that felt like a public tombstone for my family's reputation. Local businessman charged in forgery case involving daughter's college fund. There it was, in black and white, for the whole town to see. I severed all communication. I blocked their numbers, their social media accounts, and the email addresses of any relatives who tried to reach out and tell me I was tearing the family apart. I moved into a small, clean apartment across town, using the money from the savings account my father had tried to access. It felt like poetic justice. My life became quiet, orderly. Work, home, and occasional drinks with Kendra or Trinity, who had surprisingly become a close confidant. We were bonded by the strange, specific trauma of being the capable daughters of families who preferred broken sons. One evening, I was sitting on my new sofa, scrolling through my phone, when I wrote something down, just for myself. It was a thought that had been circling in my mind for weeks. I didn't burn the bridge. They sold it for spare parts and was shocked when I wouldn't let them walk across the chasm on my back. Just as I was putting my phone away, a notification popped up, a text from an unknown number. My stomach tightened, but I opened it. It's Mason. I'm using a friend's phone. Mom and Dad are selling the house. I'm leaving town for good. Can we meet one last time? I need to say something. I stared at the message for a long time. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to delete it, and move on. But a cold, detached curiosity won out. What could he possibly have left to say? I agreed to meet him at a public park, halfway between my new apartment and my old life. We met at a bench overlooking a duck pond. It was a grey, overcast day that matched my mood perfectly. Mason looked older than 20. The entitled swagger was gone, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. He didn't look at me, just stared at the murky water where a few sad-looking ducks were paddling. They accepted an offer on the house, he said, his voice flat. They have to use the money for Dad's legal fees. He's probably going to do time, Caroline. A year, maybe 2. I said nothing. I just watched a duck dip its head underwater. He's a felon now. He'll lose his business license. Mom is a wreck. She can't stop crying. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a bitter, wounded resentment. You did this. You blew up our entire lives. Was it worth it? Are you happy now? A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a sound of joy or humour. It was a dry, hollow thing, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Happy? No, I'm not happy, but I'm not drowning either. You're all just finally feeling the consequences of your own choices. Our choices? He scoffed. Dad made a mistake. He was trying to help me. He stole from me to help you, I corrected him. And you were all fine with it until you got caught. You listened to that recording, didn't you? Mum said I didn't know how to use money, that I just hoarded it. You know what I was saving for, Mason? A down payment on a small condo, so I could get out of that house, the house you're now being forced to leave. I stood up, looking down at him. He seemed to shrink on the bench. You're right about one thing. I did this. They raised me to be invisible, to be the responsible, self-sufficient background character in the grand drama of your life. They never once stopped to think that the invisible girl was watching and learning and taking notes. Maybe now they'll finally see the cost of my education. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't forgive him. I didn't flinch. I just turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the ducks. A few weeks later, I stood at the front of a conference room at the bank's corporate headquarters. A group of new interns, all bright-eyed and eager, looked up at me. My new role involved leading training sessions on internal fraud detection. Layla stood in the back, arms crossed, a small, approving nod on her face. Today's case study involves a compromised joint beneficiary account. I began, clicking to the first slide. It was an anonymized version of my own case file. The perpetrator used a digitally lifted signature from a juvenile tax form to forge consent for a 5-figure withdrawal. The motive was familial favoritism. The initial red flag was not systemic. It was caught by the co-beneficiary, who happened to be a bank employee. I walked them through the evidence piece by piece. The IP address, the time-stamped email, the shoddy forgery. I was clinical, detached, my voice even. I was turning my trauma into a textbook, my pain into a procedure. It was the coldest, most satisfying power I had ever felt. That evening, I let myself into my quiet apartment. It was small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish in the cupboard, I had bought myself. There were no ghosts of other people's breakfasts here. I walked into the kitchen and looked at the new toaster sitting on my counter. It was chrome and sleek, its surface gleaming under the lights, completely untouched. I took 2 slices of bread from a fresh loaf, dropped them into the slots, and pushed the lever down. The wires inside glowed a fierce, clean orange. A moment later, the toast popped up, startlingly loud in the silence of my apartment. I caught it, placed it on a plate, and spread a thin layer of butter on top. I stood there in my kitchen, alone but entirely at peace, and took a bite. Funny, I thought revenge would taste burnt. But this? Golden brown, perfect crunch.